First of all, we've got Scott Knightley. Scott's the owner and president of Envirovantage, and they're based in New Hampshire in USA. Scott's a pioneer in our demolition and remediation industry. He started the company 32 years ago in his dormitory room in college. I'd like to see how he did all the recycling into the bins in his college room. Maybe there's some photos in the presentation. But today they've got multiple offices in different states. They remove contaminants from buildings. They perform demolition work throughout the US and internationally. Scott's held many prominent roles in the industry, and he's currently serving as the president of the National Demolition Association, which is based in Washington, D.C. We've had a little bit of a chat in the break about what he's going to talk about, and I can't believe the complexity and what's involved in this. He's going to talk to you about demolishing a five-storey mill and how they cleared the brownfield site to do all the work. So, big welcome, please, for Scott Knightley.
The project seemed pretty straightforward. Remove 300 windows, gut walls, ceilings, and floors, open up area for stairs and elevators, and bring the structure back to bare walls and structural beams.
The demolition between the two buildings, 1840 is a fairly old structure here in New England, maybe not over in London, but here it's a fairly old structure, and it was built with brick. And we were detaching it from an 1870s building that was actually owned by somebody else on the same property. And there was a courtyard down there, so we had limited access. And they had built the two buildings together with 3-foot beams that were loaded with concrete. So we had to get in between the two buildings, reverse engineer how they built the building, and then come up with a way to get these beams down and cut and out without taking down the two walls between the mills.
Using a complex plan created by Envirovantage, 72 dumpsters were rotated through the site, with materials sorted into 12 categories designated for specific waste. Envirovantage was able to use its newest cutting-edge technology, a robotic cutting machine that assisted in the separation of the two buildings and the removal of the exterior walls. The final challenge: once each section was completed and allowed for window removal, the work had to be done in space that was already finished. In August 2016, the mill at Saco Falls opened for tenants with challenges overcome.
Thank you. I appreciate the warm welcome from you, John, and thank you all for coming this afternoon. I understand from the AV guy I've got the toughest slot here to fill and try not to let people sleep on me, so I appreciate your attention. Thank you. The Lofts at Saco Falls is a great example of downtown revitalization project taking place across the United States. Urban and Main Street development have become an emerging market within the demolition industry over the past decade, especially along all the rivers throughout the United States. During the 70s and 80s, urban sprawl took over most downtowns. With cheaper virgin land on the outskirts of town, stores and offices moved to the outskirts of downtown. A slow death of the downtowns occurred. As the states and towns worked hard to get the commerce back downtown, it was apparent that they needed people living in the area to stimulate the need for future development. The mills that were left when industry moved out had fallen into disrepair for decades and left downtowns blighted and in poor condition. Most towns struggle with the lack of income and were working hard to find solutions. With the mills taking up the best real estate in most towns, and it became obvious that they needed to be either torn down and replaced with something new or restored. This fact traveled all the way to Congress, and they passed legislation to entice redevelopment of the properties nationwide. With a hefty federal brownfield program credits in place and matching historical funds, on top of that, redevelopment began. We have been working directly with cities and towns on the reclamation and redevelopment of the mills in the Northeast for the past 32 years. To date, we have completed over 40 mill projects totaling over 8 million square feet. These projects take years in the making, so we work with planning boards and local government across the region with pre-construction planning, on the levels of decontamination required and the strategy that will need to be employed for select or complete demolition for the overall projects to succeed. For this particular project, our relationship with the cities of Biddeford and Saco, Maine, and the developer began in 2005, when we completed the first of the 16 mills targeted in the Pepperell Mill campus. The Pepperell Mill campus revitalization, which the Lofts of Saco Falls are a part of, is a 750,000 square foot of previous industrial manufacturing space. This 16-acre site is made up of 16 mill buildings connected by pedestrian bridges. From the start of the downtown revitalization in 2005, we have completed 7 of these mills. As in almost every mill project, there is water source to contend with, whether it is under the mill as a sluiceway through the turbines for water to go through the turbines, or the building is built directly on the river, utilizing the dam for energy. In any case, access is extremely difficult. This particular mill received its power through turbines in the sub-basement, but in most cases you'll lose all access on one side of the mill due to the river and the dam, and have major concerns for water contamination while you're completing your work. These mills create unique difficulties for engineers engineering load capacities for the floors. These mills were mostly constructed of brick and timber with wood floors throughout. You may request from an engineer a load calculation for a 150-year-old mill and get laughed at. So you'll need to find an engineer who understands the loads and capacities of century-old timber beams on brick piers, and one who is willing to sign off on a plan that is effective and economical for the project. As in most mills left abandoned for decades, structural integrity is a major part in the planning. Beams have been cut over the years to adapt for new uses, and little attention is paid to the structural integrity of the building. In all cases, including this one, we required a comprehensive engineering study for our work to proceed. In almost every case, the loads of the floors are light, so all equipment for the interior of the work had to be completed with very light floor loading machinery, such as the Brock 100, and electric sherpers and electric carts for material removal. During this particular mill's slow death, it went through many lives: manufacturing, warehousing, and retail space. At the end, we were left with a compromised structure, lead paint, PCBs, asbestos, mercury, pigeon guano, and the usual multitude of hazardous liquids that have been unlabeled, packaged throughout the years that are left in the structure. As the mill had fallen into disrepair, scavenged by vagrants, all the asbestos have been left all over every square footage of the building, with lead paint debris, along with all of the other materials that were left from the other occupants. Careful planning must be done to protect the workers of these mills, and this one was no different from all the others. As we all know, asbestos is a specific trade, but in most mills, the work is all interrelated and completed with a multi-trained worker. This typical requires asbestos-trained demolition crews that can run equipment and abate simultaneously. This has been our focus, to train abatement or demolition workers to complete each other's trade. This has been the center of our work piece. We're able to complete all hazardous material removals and demolition with one work crew. This has helped us be cost-effective for the owners and developers while maintaining a tight schedule. We have specialized in this for decades, and it has required many years of forethought and training to build crews capable of completing these projects safely and economically. As you are aware, it's not easy to train asbestos workers to run specialized equipment, and training takes time and resources. But with crews that can handle both aspects of the job, it becomes economically advantageous to the owners, developers, and to our company. It is also imperative to invest in equipment and tools to keep the workers safe and effective. This required purchasing robotic equipment like the Brock 100, electric sherpers for material removing. We have utilized Brocks on lulls and cranes to access safely over rivers and dams that do not have space for staging. We have also built or adapted engineered structures to go through large windows, which are counterweighted and connected to the floors to work off for remediation of asbestos caulking and lead paint on the exterior of the buildings over the riversides. This was developed due to the fact that most roofs, structures on these old mills could not handle swing staging or anything attached to it. As mentioned before, historical tax credits make a lot of these projects viable, but they come with restrictions. The Historical Commission can be inflexible, to say the least, in their interpretation of regulations, but you must compromise and work together to solve their issues and concerns, or your project will never be approved. The Historical Society played a predominant role in the mandate and oversight of our extensive amount of sandblasting to brick, wood, columns, and beams throughout the structure. With multiple test patches being done with glass beads, walnut shells, and conventional media on all of these different surfaces, it was concluded that glass media gave the best finished look and left the building free of lead paint and very pleasing to the tenants when complete. Working closely with a general contractor, the project seemed pretty straightforward. Remove 300 windows, demolish walls, ceilings, and floors, open up areas for stairs and elevators, and take down a 50-foot by 100-foot section of an 1870s building and bring the structure back to bare walls for redevelopment all within 8 weeks. As we all know, it's never that easy. Given the late start in the fall of 2015, due to permits, the developer requested an accommodation that all asbestos windows be kept in place in anticipation of the cold New England weather. The challenge in dealing with the 16 interconnected mill buildings, all with different individual ownership, also presented the challenge of dealing with the unique horseshoe shape of the original 1842 building. The demolition included taking down portions of the building that had been added at a later date, with a separation point being the structure where the newer building, 1870s, tied into the original historical building of 1842. The buildings were tied together by 3-foot filled steel beams. This was further complicated by the location to the adjacent courtyard and the contiguous buildings. The team formulated a plan to cut 5 stories of steel beams out, ensure them, and remove them using a Volvo high reach. As the first contractor into all sections of the mill, and knowing that others were coming in close behind, Envirovantage's strategy was to execute the interior work first. With multiple operations going on each floor, it required many supervisors and a couple of project managers to ensure safety and schedule. Interior walls were torn down using small, lighter weight machinery, opening a space for mid-sized and larger machinery to be utilized to expedite the work. The final challenge takes us back to the original request by the GC, which was to leave the windows in place for the final phase for weather protection. Once each section was completed and the spring weather allowed for window removal, it now had to be done in spaces that were already completed. The Envirovantage team strategized to find the most effective and efficient means to complete the windows under these new conditions. The plan, although time-consuming, would ensure that the delicate extraction and selective demolition would protect the interior finishes, all while protecting other trades from asbestos on the windows. In August 2016, the lofts at Saco Falls were opened for tenancy. Within the lobby of the front courtyard, historic artifacts salvaged by our team from the building during the project. This included turbines and large pulleys utilized in former manufacturing that were found in the sub-basement. The project was completed on time, under budget, and with 0 safety instances. We are currently working on 4 more mills, totaling another 500,000 square feet that will be turned over to housing and healthcare facilities. I'd like to thank you guys for your time listening to this particular project. It's not quite as elaborate as some of these stadium and large building teardowns, but for the prevalence of these historic mills, it's critical for the revitalization of the rivers and shorefronts within the United States. And with all of the different funding sources, it was the only thing that would make them happen, because with the Brownfields program, it basically takes the liability off the new owner. So you wouldn't be acquiring the liability of the hazardous waste that were on site, so that you could actually redevelop and turn it into something new, and that would revitalize the downtown. In almost all of the cases, it's going to be housing on top floors, hotels, and retail on the lower floors. And when you do that for inside of town, it just grows exponentially out through the town with theaters and grocery stores and arts. And we're coming right back into these old cities and the towns. We have Portsmouth, New Hampshire. That's probably been restored for probably the past 15 years, and they're just duplicating that nationwide as a process that really works for redeveloping the United States. I'd like to take any questions if anybody has anything. Peter.
The new owner doesn't get the liability for the brownfield, but how much testing is required before they, at least take the calculated risk of building new construction on top of these sites?
A significant amount of testing has to be done to know at least where your baseline is. One of the unique things with the brownfields programs, it doesn't go directly to developer. So we're just finishing taking down an old tannery that took up about 4 city blocks in downtown South Berwick, Maine, and they had to sell the property. The current owner had to sell the property to the town and then take first right of refusal off that after the remediation was done, because the brownfield program doesn't work for private developers. But it's a significant amount of remediation needs to be done, and it allows for a little bit more capping and managing in place than you would have normally seen. But other than that, nobody would ever take the risk to build something if they had all that risk, because you couldn't get financing for it. And that's really what it all comes down to. Are there any other questions? Got to have something. Okay, John, I guess that's it. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Not many questions, because I thought it was concise, to the point, and covered everything in the presentation. So, Scott, thank you very much. Really good.